The chilling legacy of Israel Keyes. In today's episode, when we usually talk about unsolved murders, our minds often drift to the shadowy figures still lurking in the darkness, unknown suspects who have yet to face justice. But every now and then, a case emerges that shakes us to our core, not because we don't know who committed the crimes, but because of how deeply chilling their actions were and how much remains unanswered. This is one of those cases, a story so haunting it will leave you questioning whether we can ever truly understand the depths of human depravity. This is the story of Israel Keyes. Israel Keyes was born on January 7, 1978, in Richmond, Utah, a small town nestled among rolling hills and fields, best known for its Pepperidge Farm factory churning out goldfish crackers. With fewer than 2,000 residents, Richmond was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where life moved slowly, and where faith played a central role in daily existence. For many families, including the Keyes household, religion wasn't just a part of life, it was life. Israel grew up in a large Mormon family, one of 10 children raised under strict religious teachings. His parents homeschooled him, shielding him from outside influences while instilling deep-rooted beliefs about morality, obedience, and righteousness. To an outsider, this might sound like the foundation for a wholesome upbringing. But as we peel back the layers of Israel's early years, cracks begin to show. Cracks that would eventually widen into something far darker. At some point during his youth, the Keyes family relocated from the idyllic charm of Richmond to an area just north of Colville, Washington. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Washington state, let me paint a picture for you. The western side of the state is what most people imagine when they think of Washington. Lush forests, constant rain, flannel shirts, and Starbucks on every corner. But eastern Washington? That's a different world entirely. It's vast, desolate, and dotted with small towns separated by miles of open land. Eastern Washington feels more akin to neighboring states like Idaho or Montana than it does to Seattle's bustling urban sprawl. For Israel, moving to Colville wasn't much of a culture shock. Like Richmond, it was another quiet, tight-knit community. However, it was here that the Keyes family began attending a church known as the Ark, later renamed Our Place Fellowship. At first glance, this might seem unremarkable. Just another congregation gathering to worship together. But beneath the surface, the Ark harbored sinister ideologies rooted in white supremacy and British Israelism, a belief system claiming that Anglo-Saxons are the true descendants of ancient Israelites, and therefore God's chosen people. Followers of this doctrine often held anti-Semitic views and promoted ethnocentric ideals. It's impossible to say exactly how much these toxic beliefs shaped young Israel's worldview, but it's hard to ignore the influence such an environment could have had on a developing mind. After all, growing up surrounded by hatred and division doesn't exactly foster empathy or compassion. And as fate would have it, the Keyes family wasn't the only one drawn to this controversial church. They became close friends with another family, the Keyhoes. Now, the name Chevy Kehoe may ring a bell for some of you. Chevy, 5 years older than Israel, went on to become a notorious white supremacist and convicted murderer. Serving multiple life sentences without parole, he's infamous for kidnapping, torturing, and killing a gun dealer, his wife, and their 8-year-old daughter. When police finally caught up with Chevy in 1997, it ended in a dramatic shootout captured on video. His younger brother, Chain, also dabbled in criminal activity, though on a slightly smaller scale. While there's no concrete evidence linking Israel directly to the Kehoe's violent exploits, it's reasonable to assume they crossed paths during their formative years. Imagine being a teenager in a remote town, looking up to someone like Chevy, a charismatic yet deeply disturbed individual whose worldview glorified violence and racial superiority. How might that shape your own perception of right and wrong? But Israel Keyes didn't follow the same path as the Kehoes, at least not outwardly. Instead, he developed a fascination with serial killers, particularly Ted Bundy. Bundy's ability to manipulate, deceive, and inflict pain captivated Israel. He admired Bundy's meticulous planning and his desire to remain anonymous, avoiding the spotlight that often accompanied high-profile crimes. These traits would later define Israel's own modus operandi. By the time he turned 17, Israel had left Colville behind, embarking on a journey that took him across the country. He briefly lived in New York, before enlisting in the United States Army. During his service, he rose to the rank of specialist and was stationed at Fort Hood in Texas, somewhere overseas in Egypt, and finally at Fort Lewis near Tacoma, Washington. Despite spending years in uniform, Israel never confessed to committing any crimes during his enlistment. However, he admitted to investigators later in life that his darkest impulses began taking shape during this period. After leaving the military in 2001, Israel settled in Nia Bay, a tiny fishing village perched on the northwestern tip of Washington state. Nestled along the rugged coastline overlooking Vancouver Island, Nia Bay was home to roughly 800 people, predominantly members of the Maka tribe. Here, Israel reinvented himself once again. He worked as a landscaper, handyman, and jack of all trades, earning a reputation as a dependable and likable guy. He even started a family, fathering a daughter and seemingly embracing the responsibilities of parenthood. But appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary life, Israel Keyes was anything but normal. Somewhere between July and October 2001, he committed his first confirmed murder. We don't know the identity of this victim, nor do we know where the crime took place. What we do know is that this marked the beginning of a killing spree spanning over a decade, leaving behind a trail of devastation that investigators are still trying to piece together. What sets Israel Keyes apart from other serial killers is his methodical approach. Unlike many offenders who act impulsively, driven by emotion or opportunity, Keyes planned his crimes months, and sometimes years, in advance. He created what he called murder kits, caches containing weapons, tools, and supplies buried in strategic locations across the United States. These kits allowed him to strike quickly and efficiently, ensuring minimal risk of detection. Even more disturbing, he kept no records of their contents or locations, storing everything solely in his memory. Over the next several years, Keyes traveled extensively, committing murders in Washington, New Jersey, Vermont, and beyond. One of his most infamous victims was Bill and Lorraine Currier, an elderly couple abducted from their home in Essex, Vermont, in June 2011. Keyes broke into their house, bound them, and forced them into their car. He drove them to an abandoned farmhouse, where he executed Bill in the basement and sexually assaulted Lorraine upstairs before strangling her to death. Their bodies were never found, adding to the tragedy of their loss. Keyes continued his reign of terror until February 2012, when he abducted Samantha Koenig, an 18-year-old barista working at a coffee stand in Anchorage, Alaska. Samantha's disappearance sent shockwaves through the community, especially when a ransom note arrived weeks later, accompanied by a staged photograph making it appear as though she were still alive. Tragically, Samantha had already been murdered shortly after her abduction. Her body was dismembered and hidden beneath the frozen surface of Matanuska Lake. The investigation into Samantha's disappearance ultimately led authorities to Israel Keyes. On March 13, 2012, he was arrested in Texas after using her debit card at various ATMs. Initially charged with bank robbery and murder, Keyes struck a deal with investigators, agreeing to provide information about his crimes in exchange for certain considerations. Over the course of months, he revealed details about his victims, his methods, and his motivations, but always on his terms. He refused to divulge specifics unless pressed, forcing law enforcement to play a delicate game of negotiation. Despite their efforts, much of Keyes' dark legacy remains shrouded in mystery. In December 2012, while awaiting trial, he took his own life, leaving behind a blood-soaked suicide note and countless unanswered questions. To this day, the full scope of his crimes remains unknown. Investigators believe he may have killed dozens of people, but without a confession, proving these theories is nearly impossible. So why does Israel Keyes continue to haunt us? Perhaps it's because he represents the ultimate enigma, a man who meticulously planned his crimes, evaded capture for years, and ultimately slipped through the cracks of justice. Or maybe it's because he reminds us that evil isn't always obvious. Sometimes, it hides behind a friendly smile and a helping hand. As we close this chapter of today's episode, I want to leave you with one final thought. In the words of FBI profiler Jim Clemente, Israel Keyes didn't want fame, he wanted chaos. And in that chaos lies a reminder of the fragility of safety, the complexity of human nature, and the enduring quest for truth. Thank you for joining me on this journey into darkness. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.